It is 7:00 p.m. on Monday, June 29th, 2020, and I call to order this regular meeting of the Richfield School Board. Attending this evening's virtual board meeting are board members Paula Cole, Christine Malik, Tim Paulus, Allegra Smishek, and Peter Tensing, and I am Crystal Brackey. We are also joined by Superintendent Unowski and several district staff members who you will hear from later in the agenda. This meeting is taking place virtually as allowed by Minnesota State Statute 13D.021 in light of the peacetime state of emergency declared by Governor Walz due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We will continue to meet virtually until either the state of emergency has ended or until we receive updated guidance from public health officials about the safety of holding in-person public meetings. Richfield Public Schools' mission statement is that we strive to inspire and empower each individual to learn, grow, and excel. And that is especially important for us to keep at the center of our meeting this evening as we do our work together from afar. We also want to welcome those of you watching this meeting live or in the future via YouTube. Thank you for being with us. So with that, our first item of business this evening is to approve the agenda before us. As this is a routine business item, I will not individually call on board members, but rather do an open ask for any comments or questions related to the agenda. Seeing and hearing none, is anyone prepared to move the agenda as presented?
I will move the agenda as presented.
Sorry, was that you, Christine?
Yeah, it was like three of us, but sure.
I will give it to you. Thank you. Sorry for the awkwardness. Any final discussion? Okay, so we have a motion by Mr. Paulus and a second by Ms. Malik. And Ms. Malik, as our clerk, will be taking all of the roll call votes this evening.
Okay, Ms. Cole.
Aye.
Mr. Paulus.
Aye.
Ms. Smishek.
Aye.
Mr. Tensing.
Aye.
And the clerk votes aye, and Ms. Brackey.
Aye. The agenda is approved. So we now move into the information and proposals non-action items section of the agenda. I received several requests for public comment this evening, which is wonderful. And so we will now hear from members of our community who submitted their remarks in video, audio, and written form. Guidance for public comment is available in Board Policy 216 on the richfieldschools.org website if anybody would like to reference that for this evening or for future public comments. So our first public comment, and actually I want to proactively apologize in advance for any mispronunciations that I make, the irony of mispronouncing that word, for anybody's names. So our first public comment is from Ashley Quinones, and we are going to begin the video momentarily.
Hello, I'm Ashley Quinones. I'm the wife of Brian Quinones, who was murdered by the Richfield and Edina police in Richfield, Minnesota on September 7th, 2019, as well as I'm the mother of Cameron Quinones, Brian's only child, who does attend schools in Richfield. I do not see the point in the police being in a school. And I am so thankful that other neighboring cities, much larger cities, are seeing that they have no place there as well. Because the school to prison pipeline is enhanced by SROs being in there. My son does not feel safe around police, nor does he trust that they will do their job and act accordingly, and especially when engaging with him, as we have been disrespected by the police in Richfield, as well as council members in Richfield on a repeated basis since the murder of my husband. Anything you guys can do to ensure that the SRO contract is canceled would be amazing, because we are residents here, and I've been driving my son to school outside of Richfield, especially after Brian's passing, just to avoid the fact that they have SROs. And majority of his friends and our neighbors go to his school. So we did switch to Richfield this year right before COVID. He didn't attend very long. And the principal and a lot of the faculty had agreed to ensure that there would be little to no engagement from the SROs on behalf of my child, which I don't think is a necessity. I don't see the point of the police being present in a children's place. I don't like the fact that I have to think about them potentially ever showing up for a shift. I don't know if they're qualified to be SROs, but one of the murderers in my husband's case was an SRO. And like I said, we've been harassed outside of school. I can't imagine that they wouldn't do the same thing there at some point. So I'm asking if you guys can please end your contract with Richfield PD and get SROs out of your school. I have quite a bit of people that are and have successfully worked on it. Chantel Allen got them helped to get them out of St. Paul. We have Nakima Levy-Pounds who can help. We have a lot of good resources, strong leaders in the state of Minnesota that can help to ensure that this does happen as well. And I hope that you guys follow what Minneapolis and St. Paul are doing as far as getting rid of them out of the school system. Thank you.
Thank you to Ashley. Our next public comment is also via video and comes from Margaret Perez.
Hi, good evening, Richfield School Board members. My name is Margaret Perez. I am the mom of two Richfield students, one current student and one future student. I have an ingoing third grader and a 2-year-old. I'm here today to ask that you remove school resource officers, aka police presence in our Richfield schools in direct response to requests coming from our communities of color in the wake of the killing of George Floyd, but also in the wake of just an ongoing crisis of over policing of Black and Brown people in our community. And I think that this is one of the introductory ways that we get everybody really comfortable with police just being sort of a default option. I have a public health background. I work professionally in public health. I'm just completing my public health master's degree. And we're all about prevention. And I think SROs kind of get thrown out as, oh, this is a prevention thing. Having police in schools is not prevention. What is prevention, and what I'd really like to see our school district investing in is much bigger investments in early childhood education. I'm really pleased with the direction that the district is going, but I think we could be doing so much more. Having social and mental health service support. There's so many roles that these SROs are playing in our students' lives that don't need to be done by a uniformed officer. There's absolutely no reason why this work should be performed by a police officer. We have amazing trained people, mental health professionals, social workers, public health workers that would be capable of responding to the incidents that happen where SROs are now being used. And that would really count as true crime prevention. Crime prevention is investing in the resources upfront years before a young person would ever need to interact in a negative way with our criminal justice system, and ensuring that they have the resources that they need to really grow and prosper throughout their lives. I do not see SROs as being preventative. They're absolutely a response to the over-policing of our Black and Brown people and our young people. It really concerns me both for my children who are bicultural, biracial, and also for their friends, and specifically their Black friends that are in the Richfield School District. So I ask that you remove SROs from our schools and divert that money into things like early childhood education, housing stability, mental health workers, and social health workers. Thank you.
Thank you to Margaret. Our next comment was submitted via audio file from Tristan Weinmaster.
Dear members of the school board, I was encouraged to hear you'll be discussing the status of our district's contract with school resource officers. As a teacher at Richfield Middle School, I feel it would benefit our students to discontinue the use of school resource officers. I would like to share some of my personal experiences I've had with school resource officers, as well as some of the reasons why many districts are ending these contracts. In my 4 years at the middle school, I've only had a few interactions with the school resource officers. What I've seen is that the SROs spend most of their time in their offices. It appeared they had nothing to do and did not do much for our school. In an informal conversation with one of the officers, she told me that the officers in Richfield do not want the assignment of an SRO because it's boring. She said the position tends to be given to the most junior officers and they leave the position as soon as they're able. In my opinion, this means we're getting the least experienced, least trained, and least motivated officers in our schools, and they're only in the schools biding their time for a better position. Over the course of my 4 years, the school has had 4 different officers, and the role does not benefit the officers or our school, and it has the potential to damage students. One damaging thing I noticed was that one of the school resource officers would leave his police car running throughout the entire school day, and when he would leave, he turned on his siren at full volume, speeding out of the parking lot. Anytime this happened, it disturbed student learning and could be frightening for staff and students. I heard that that same officer was eventually dismissed from the position after insulting a student for his appearance in the hallway. We do not need people like him in our schools that do more harm than good. In another incident, one of the SROs came to my classroom and knocked on the door after lunch. I was surprised to see a police officer at the door, and he asked to speak to one of the Black female students in the class. My heart dropped as my instinct was someone in her family must have died for him to come and get her from the classroom. Instead, he had followed her up the stairs to my 3rd floor classroom to scold her about recess behavior. This felt extremely inappropriate in his role as a SRO. Roughhousing during recess, as many students do, should not be addressed as if it were a crime by the police. Typical small misbehaviors like that could be addressed by campus supervisors, outreach workers, counselors, administrators, school social workers, or student engagement specialists that also oversee lunch and recess. I can't imagine how that 11-year-old girl felt getting in trouble by the police just for playing like so many other students do. How could she come back to class and focus on learning when she'd been singled out as a criminal? We have no need for a police officer in the school, and we're wasting valuable resources by keeping this position. Our school and our students would benefit much more from using the money spent on an SRO to hire more outreach workers, support staff, or an additional student engagement specialist. People in these roles have much more contact with students and much more potential to positively impact students rather than negatively impacting them. I have one final experience to share. 2 years ago, I had the privilege of working with students with developmental disabilities. A group of 4 officers joined our SRO at the time to present the class with the opportunity of joining the Special Olympics. Many of the officers nonchalantly rested their hands on their pistols as they're talking, probably without even thinking about it. Personally, I felt extremely uncomfortable with having 5 armed police in the classroom. Even though they were in the school for a good cause, it was uncomfortable to be around so many guns in a classroom. As a district, we do not allow weapons in school, and yet the SROs are armed. If it was uncomfortable and intimidating for me as an adult white teacher, police officers carrying guns in school are probably even more intimidating for 11 to 14-year-olds, especially after so many recent incidences of police murder in the Twin Cities, including in Richfield. We cannot ignore the fact that at Richfield Middle School, 3/4 of our students are students of color. Some of the relevant facts about the negative effects of having police officers in schools are: schools with cops in them are more likely to refer children to law enforcement, even for non-serious violent behaviors, and Black students are disproportionately punished and arrested in schools. White children report feeling safer with a police officer, while most Black students report not feeling safer with a police officer around. Higher police presence can negatively impact test scores, graduation rates, and college enrollment rates. In white affluent schools, school resource officers see their jobs as protecting the school from outside threats, while in schools that are lower income and majority students of color, like Richfield, police see the students themselves as threats. In the AFT, the American Federation of Teachers, passed a resolution on June 18th calling for separation of school safety and policing. Police officers must be separated from Richfield schools. They do not serve a positive purpose and have the potential to damage our students and our school culture. Let us follow the lead of so many other districts taking action to put our financial resources where they're needed and useful. Please vote to end our contract with school resource officers at Richfield Public Schools and invest the money in meeting our students' needs instead. Sincerely, Tristan Wymaster. Thank you.
Thank you, Tristan. The final two comments this evening were both submitted in writing, and so I am going to read them aloud on behalf of the authors. The first is from Ben Sunderland. Dear Richfield School Board, we as a society have come to a place of reckoning after the murder of George Floyd. It is time for all of us to take affirmative approaches to improve the treatment of people of color at the hands of law enforcement. One such action I hope you will consider is the removal of SROs from schools. There are 3 lines of thought I would like you to consider as positive reasons to remove SROs from Richfield schools. Number 1, defunding the police. By no longer contracting with Richfield Police, the school board can put those resources into counselors, psychologists, or social workers that actually engage with students in need and work with them on an ongoing basis to address the roots of a child's misbehavior. Directing students to be addressed with law enforcement resources treats children as criminals and promotes the school to prison pipeline. If our goal is to build healthy children, there is no place for treating them as criminals and promoting frequent police interactions. Removing SROs from schools does not remove the ability for administrators to call the police if they feel a response from police is needed. What it does do is promote alternative interventions to children in need and promotes less violent behavior in schools by modeling appropriate responses to misbehavior. Number 2, indoctrinating students into a system of hero worship of police. One of the problems with addressing the violence in policing is the reflexive reaction of many in the community that police can do no wrong and should be offered wide latitude to perform their jobs. The educational system promotes this line of thinking whenever tours of their cars are offered or police show up in the classroom with shiny badges, guns, and uniforms at an early age. Having police in schools normalizes calling the police the first moment we experience difficulty. It also normalizes reacting to perceived threats with actual violence. Schools should be safe spaces where children are insulated from incarceration. That may seem a shocking statement, but it is surely one we are all familiar with from our college days. Misbehavior should be directed to parents and administrators who model effective coping mechanisms and interpersonal problem solving, rather than redirecting our personal problems to police. Number 3, police as security guards in schools. SROs are the administrative response to children fighting, drug dealing, and school shootings. But SROs do not keep those problems from happening. For the really tragic events like a school shooting at worst, the SRO becomes the first target, or at best, the adult who ushers students out the door. In essence, their role becomes no different than that of other teachers and administrators. As a trade-off for a perceived increased insecurity, we actually decrease the security of children because police culture is a threat to their well-being. I don't personally know what this daily threat of a police interaction has on a student of color, but it doesn't take science and statistics to deduce that for some students, it makes the building a place to be feared and to dissuade them from entering the school, rather than a place of refuge and comfort that enhances and improves learning outcomes. What are we trying to accomplish with police in schools, and what are we actually accomplishing? For those that wish to have police in schools, we must answer both questions in terms that are positive for learning outcomes, because we are spending public educational resources to the police department instead of on our children. Thank you for your consideration. Thank you, Ben. The final written comment comes from Jamie Plouffe. I read on a Richfield page that you are speaking to the school board about removing SROs from Richfield schools this week. I am white, and I could only imagine how terrifying their presence at school must be to our students of color. And after listening to Ashley Quinones speak about her son's inability to return to school because of their presence after his father was killed by police, I am 100% in support of removal. Thank you for your work. And thank you, Jamie. So that ends our public comments that were submitted for this evening's meeting. Thank you to all of our community members who shared their thoughts with us in advance of our initial conversation that will happen in just a few minutes about school resource officers in our schools. And I also want to say special thanks to Scott Nelson for his technical support in getting the video and audio comments uploaded for the meeting. So as a reminder, in these virtual meetings, we will work with anyone who wishes to provide public comment to do so via written statement, audio file, or video message. And you actually experienced all three tonight. The next opportunity for public comment will be at our July 13th board meeting. The superintendent's update this evening does contain three very important items for discussion. So I am now going to turn things over to Superintendent Yanowski.
All right, thank you, Chair Brackey. As Scott gets this queued up, there are really two presentations, and we'll start with our coronavirus COVID-19 fall planning. Good evening. This is Superintendent Yanowski here to talk to you this evening about fall planning, the planning for school in light of COVID-19. Earlier this month, the governor and the Minnesota Department of Health shared with us that we are expected to plan for three possible options for school in the fall. One option is for in-person learning with social distancing, meaning that all of our students, or most of our students, would be back in buildings, and we would assume that school starts with students in their classrooms. Distance learning, meaning that students would continue learning from within their own homes. Or the other option is a hybrid, which is a mix of in-person and distance, and figuring out what is most appropriate based on the situation. When we talk about in-person learning, there would be changes to what has been past practice. The first change to keep in mind is that schools have been told to plan for functioning at 50% capacity. That means that only half of the amount of allowable students would be in each building and would be in each classroom. On top of that, we would be planning for social distancing, meaning students would be seated 6 feet apart and planning to occur to keep them socially distanced to the greatest extent possible. And even if we do provide in-person instruction in the fall, it's important for us to be aware that we will still need to provide distance or self-isolated options within our buildings for immunocompromised students and staff so that they can continue to do their jobs and they can continue to learn while remaining safe. Distance learning, as we think about the fall, will be different from spring. In spring, we were given 8 days in March to plan for what distance learning would look like. As we look towards fall, we have the entire summer to plan and work our way through each of the logistics of distance learning. Students and staff can expect synchronous live teaching to occur more frequently than it did in the spring, which means that we'll still have some asynchronous or taped teaching, but we will absolutely have a wider range of opportunities that are synchronous and live teaching. To be able to do this effectively, it also requires more professional development. And so some of our work as we come back for workshop week will clearly be around effective practices in distance learning. The third option, hybrid, is figuring out an effective mix between in-person learning and also distance. How will we make this decision is one of those things for all of us to be very clear and aware of. Richfield Public Schools will not be making the decision. The Centers for Disease Control, the Minnesota Department of Education, and the Minnesota Department of Health, along with the governor, will tell us the expectation, be it in-person, distance, or hybrid, and we are expected to comply. They'll be sharing this information with us during the last week of July. And so we will need to be flexible also throughout the school year, because as we progress and monitor through COVID-19 in the fall and winter, we may need to flexibly go between in-person, distance, and hybrid models. One of the things that we're doing for fall is setting up a summer school model to really help us learn how can we do this most effectively. So this summer, starting on July 13th with our summer school, we're going to be running 2 parallel programs, one distance learning and one in-person learning. In-person learning will occur with a small amount of students in each classroom, socially distanced, and distance learning will occur with students in their homes. What we did was we surveyed out to students, parents, and staff and allowed them to choose the model that they most effectively wanted to participate in. During this 3-week summer school, we're going to work to evaluate our options and create plans with the best practices that we're seeing implemented and the most successful models to make sure that we're building our fall based on the successful components of our summer school. As we plan throughout July, it's also important to know the work that we're going to do together to set up for a successful fall. Our management team is currently organizing planning teams and working to ensure that we are bringing the voices of staff, students, and parents to the table. Throughout July, these teams will meet to create recommendations and design options for our future use once we hit August. These draft plans are due at the end of July so that when we learn what the governor and his team share with us for the expectation for fall learning, we're able to move forward efficiently and effectively and successfully focus on great outcomes for all students. In August, we're going to begin surveying families and staff. You may be aware that some other districts have chosen to survey earlier. However, we felt it's important to wait until the governor tells us what is happening prior to asking questions to our families about what they want to participate in. We'll also be working in August on some additional professional development as needed because some of our staff who choose to be teaching distance learning may need additional professional development that we could provide during workshop week. And then once we have state guidance, we'll finalize our program design and ensure we are ready to launch school most effectively in the fall. With that, I'll pause and open it up for questions. So I think that summarized things most effectively. Just those bigger talking points. We all would like to know what's going to happen in fall because I get that question all of the time. And the reality is we're going to learn from the governor and the Department of Health and the CDC about what we should be planning to do. And so all school districts across the entire state are doing 3 different models of planning and working towards figuring out what to do. And so with that, I already shared a great deal of information. I'm going to turn it over to Chair Brecky to walk through board members and any questions you might have.
Thank you. So yes, board members will now each have time for questions and or comments, and we'll pass the microphone on to the next board member in alphabetical order once they are done. So Paula Cole is up first.
Thank you. And thank you, Steve, for putting that together. It's always nicer to hear you explain what's on the PowerPoint. So everything seems detailed to a point, especially since we don't know what the governor's going to say. My question is, what does this look like in your office and in your team to say when we hear whatever's happening, like to roll out either way? Like what? Because it makes me wonder, like, are you like having these 2 different project management things that are happening? I mean, I just want to know how we will handle once we know.
Sure. So the state has actually done a great job of creating some guidance documents. And they really lay out all of the areas for you to think about. Busing and transportation, getting to and from school, serving food, being in classrooms, passing in the hallways, cleaning. The instructional models, however, those are things that are going to be for each district. And so what's happening is Drs. Clarkson and Dr. Daniels have brought together teams. And it started with our management team and then moved on to principals and people within buildings and are expanding after this week is expanding out to students, parents, and staff to really talk about what are the most important things that you would want us to build in. Well, I would love to give you answers about what that looks like, and I have really good pictures in my head. I also know that I am not the all-saying voice of exactly what happens. I think when we're talking about what distance learning is going to look like or in classrooms, we really need those voices at the table. I do have some ideas and some things that are important to me. I think we have to provide input and choice to our families as we ask what is most important to you. I think we have to have plans for in-person, and I think we have to have plans for distance because There are people who will want to absolutely have their kids in school, and we want to have them. And there will be people who want to have school occur within their homes because they don't feel safe and it would be a significant health risk. So our biggest planning, honestly, is around distance and is around in person. And then we're doing a lot of brainstorming about what would be the best practices of hybrid. What would that look like? And we have a lot of ideas around that, but we really aren't going to be able to cement them until the month of July goes on. But know that we are meeting weekly and then many times in between to talk about how do we plan this out and chart out everything that it's going to look like across all of our buildings.
Thank you. Christine, you're up.
Thanks, Paula. I think you pretty much answered it within your my questions within your PowerPoint, except for the weird little details that aren't going to be coming together until sometime in August, I would guess. So, and I think the big thing I was going to ask that you covered was that we're ready for the potential switch to distance learning at any point once we are back in school, because I think that's just such a big unknown. And I guess the only thing I'm wondering is how we are handling like the extra training and teaching of faculty and preparing for them. Professional development was the word I was trying to come up with.
So we have a lot of work where we collaborate with our bargaining units and talk about professional development. And we have met throughout the spring to talk about what we're expecting to do in the fall. And we've also shared quite openly that we're probably going to scrap a lot of that and really have to focus on distance learning and what are the best practices in distance learning. We are looking at August as being sort of the first 2 weeks are going to be gathering information from as many students, staff, and families as humanly possible. And we're probably going to be bringing in staff early. We know for sure we're going to have our outreach workers in. I'll talk a little bit about that more in our SRO conversation, but they're going to be in by the middle of July. And we're going to have a lot of our outreach staff contacting families early August, and then teachers probably coming in for some training, again, throughout the month of August as we really make sure we're set up to do what we have to do for our kids and our families.
That is good to know. Thank you. We'll move on to Mr. Paulus.
Thank you, Steve. You had mentioned that there is available a lot of guidance that's helpful, and you mentioned busing in particular, and I really trip over that one myself, knowing that it's difficult. You know, if that comes up all the time when we talked about changing start times or we have early release or everything, we get tripped up because there are barely enough buses as is. We certainly have a shortage of drivers many years in a row. And so if the capacity of a bus is limited to 50%, how do we get past that?
If I had that answer, I would give it to you right now. We have brainstormed a bunch of different ideas. Keep in mind that we subcontract with a couple of different additional providers that provide individual transportation, taxi-based transportation, van-based transportation on top of buses. The additional component is we can work with families to perhaps provide, and we don't know the legality of this, but we've examined as an option, providing subsidies to families for transporting their own children, if at all possible. We're basically looking at essentially all options for getting students to school and recognizing that we'll probably spend more funds on transportation in this coming year because, as you point out, we can't fit every kid on the bus at the same time given some of the new logistics. But we're absolutely going to spend the month of July, and that is one of our big puzzles to try to figure out. So examples could be, we could change start time slightly if needed. We could have each building on its own transportation if needed. Again, there are just a wide range of options, and we really have to just continue having those conversations and see what parents, students, and staff want and what we can logistically pull off.
All right, thank you. Ms. Mishak.
On the slide about planning in July, you mentioned the planning teams and that it involves staff, students, and parents. And I was just curious how someone who might be interested in that would get involved and like how you're recruiting people for that stage in July, given that it's summer.
Yes, we are beginning with our management team and staff doing outreach. but Dr. Clarkson and Dr. Daniels are also working on how do we broadly communicate the ability to participate and have voice in these conversations. And so they're actually meeting tomorrow, and one of the agenda items specifically is what does outreach look like to get people starting in these meetings a week from Tuesday. And so that is a lot of the work, and also why I talked about bringing in outreach workers and doing some of that work earlier, including early on in July, is really figuring those pieces out. We also do have an agreement with a couple of our bargaining units. They are actually coordinating with us to bring their staff to the table into some of those conversations to make sure that we have representation from places like transportation, nutrition services, teaching staff, and making sure that they are in those conversations. We've already had initial verbal agreements about how we're going to get people to the table for those dialogues too, to make sure we have representation across our staffing.
Thank you. Mr. Tensing.
So most of my questions have been answered. I also was primarily just wanting to have that sense of confidence that we're preparing along, the ability to take multiple different approaches depending upon what the situation is, knowing that it's going to be fluid. And at this point, I will hold off on understanding what those details need to be. So thank you. Ms. Brackey.
Thank you. Yeah, the one comment is similar to what Allegra mentioned, in that I'm really excited about the planning teams and opportunities for us to have a wide range of people participating in these conversations and helping our plans be as strong as they can possibly be, given all of the uncertainties. And then I think the question is just whether you're able to share what we have learned about preferences, at least as it relates to summer school, given that was, as you said, an opportunity for parallel programs to exist in similar ways that we're looking in for the fall.
Sure. So we are able to have approximately 13 classrooms because of construction for summer school with 9 kids each. That's 117 kids. And then we had unlimited capacity in summer school for distance. In our initial work, the classrooms filled up immediately, and we filled up every seat. And then we were under 50 in terms of distance learning, but then we have put on some aggressive pushes to try to fill and expand our distance learning. And so we have gotten ourselves closer to 100, but we ended up figuring out it looked like about 75% to 80% of people wanted in-person learning if given that choice. We've also heard estimates in general that you should assume 80-20. That 80% of people are most likely going to want in person if available, whereas approximately 20% of people are not. And they are making those, again, I don't know if that's scientific or not. It's coming out of the states, it's coming out of the government in general. But you should assume that for staff, you should assume that for students, and somewhere in that window. I also did get a text from one of my cabinet team members, and they did also arrange for a safe and supportive schools meeting, and that's one of our venues to receive input from parents and from students, and that's actually happening July 20th. And so they are doing an additional outreach of safe and supportive schools to keep and help us plan as we continue moving forward.
Thank you. That's really helpful information. So having everyone been able to go through once, I'll just do a final open call for any last comments or questions on this topic. Okay, pausing, looking at faces on the screen. I don't see anything. So I will turn it back over to the superintendent for our next conversation.
Yeah, just to sum up, it is really hard to not have answers. It's really hard to not be able to say what we're going to do. But one of the things that is really important is when you ask people to have input and you're trying to plan most effectively, you can't walk in with the answers already done. And so it is extremely challenging for me to not have answers at this time. And I've already fielded a lot of questions about people who want those same answers. So I appreciate your patience and know that the process is part of what we're trying to accomplish. One of the conversations we promised to have at our previous board meeting was to be talking about SROs, or school resource officers. And so I put together a PowerPoint that sort of describes our relationship and gives a little background information. I'm waiting for Scott to cue that up, even though I see a dark screen up there. And turning it over to me, this is Superintendent Unowski with you again to talk about school resource officers, SROs, and the relationship between Richfield Public Schools and the Richfield Police Department. Schools across the entire country and schools within the state of Minnesota are really taking a step back to examine what is our relationship with our police department and what relationship should we have with our police department. And we believe as Richfield Public Schools, this is an important time for us to really deeply examine our overall police relationship. The school board, who oversees me, has tasked me with gathering input and perspectives from staff, administrators, and our students. The board also tasked me with examining our strategic plan comments and any previous feedback to see, are there general patterns to the feedback and commentary about the relationship between Richfield Public Schools and our police department? And I've been asked to create a recommendation to the school board for our next steps about what should we do in relationship to our local police department, and should we have an open relationship with our local police department. My plan is to have a recommendation and next conversation to occur during our August 3rd meeting. And so that is the timeline with which I have been asked to gather that information to bring back a recommendation to the board. Initially, school resource officers were designed to be participating and partnering with schools to increase school safety. The goal of community-based policing is to create a safer community based on student-police relationships that are built in a positive way. They're also designed, SROs, to provide fast access to our police department as needed. So as such, within our contract, we have one officer located in Richfield High School and one located in Richfield Middle School. This is also a financial relationship that it's important to be aware of. On July 1st, 2017, we began a 4-year contract with the Richfield Police Department. That contract ends on June 30th, 2021. You may ask, why are we examining the relationship at this time then? Within that contract, it does provide a 30-day cancellation option. So should we choose to have a relationship that doesn't involve police in our schools, we do have the option of making that decision even prior to the contract coming to an end. Within that contract, it outlines the roles, responsibilities, and partnership and the expectations of both the Richfield Police and also Richfield Public Schools. It's important to note that there is a financial component to this partnership. Each school in the state of Minnesota has what's called a Safe Schools Levy. It's funding designed to provide safe schools and the supports and systems to create a safe school. The overall levy constitutes about $340,000 of our overall budget, and about $75,000 of that is spent in relationship with the Richfield Police Department. It's also important to note that these are restricted funds by state statute and only allowed to be spent on things that are designed around school safety. So what does Richfield Public Schools use these funds for? We do partner with the police and have SROs, or school resource officers, in our building. We use these funds to increase our school counselors and make sure that we're having proactive mental health programming through our counselors and additional mental health supports in our building. We also have internal district security in our buildings to support our students, and also cameras and other technological advances to ensure that our schools are designed in a safe and organized way. So what really are SROs? SROs are a police presence within our schools, and they do have their own office. They're trained in the Richfield Public Schools policies and expectations. And so we spend time with our officers to make sure that they are trained and taught how we like our work to be done within Richfield Public Schools in a way that supports our students and families. They're assigned by the police department proactive relationship responsibilities. So it would be common to find our resource officers partnering with students in a way that helps them feel comfortable and safe in the environment. They're also designed as a community officer, designed to build community-based relationships to make the entire Richfield community safe. It is important to note they are a regular uniformed police officer, and they are able to take action in our schools when police intervention is required. They are also the only member of our staff trained specifically in police protocols and in safety practices. As we think about what they are, it's also important to note what they are not and what they do not do. They are separate by contract and by statute from all school disciplines. So our officers are not utilized as we determine what are the appropriate consequences for a student. They're also separate from all student data. They do not have access by law to any of our student files or any private information about any of our students. and they are part of an overall school safety team. And so as we look at ways to ensure that our campus is more safe and more effectively designed, they do sit at the table in that conversation and make sure that we have an organized building that is safe for our students. At this time, I think it is important to hear from each of our board members to hear what is your perspective about our relationship with Richfield Public Schools and Richfield Police Department. And as we task me going forward with gathering data and information, what would you want me to know? All right, so thank you with that. One thing is I was reflecting on the presentation that I didn't share. So as each of our schools has a school safety team, each of our schools has a social worker. They are part of the school safety team along with our administrators in the building. There is also a mental health worker, and we worked very hard to gather those funds from outside of Richfield, and so they are also part of that school safety team. And then we have a set of staff who also participate on that school safety team. And a lot of that work is around proactive responses, looking at some of the social emotional supports and safety components for our kids. But one of the things that I realized was not in there was talking about that school safety team overall. And so with that, I am going to turn things back to Crystal and you all for any comments, statements, or questions.
Great. Thank you, Steve, both for the presentation and just the information that it shared, and also for in it outlining the initial charge that we have given you and your team and the steps that we're going to take from here. So as Steve said, at this time, board members will each have a chance to reflect and or to request information and share questions about the path forward. And I am going to get us started before we continue in alphabetical order. I am also just very loosely going to be keeping track of time, not to limit discussion, but just to give people a sense of time, given how easy it can be to lose track of the clock when we're having these conversations. So if you hear me say 5 minutes, it's just a point of information for whomever is speaking, and that includes me too. So with that, I want to share thoughts from both a personal and a systemic point of view, because it informs how I am approaching these conversations as a board member. So personally, I taught in a middle school with a uniformed officer 20 years ago in rural North Carolina. And I remember being shocked when I first started that there was an officer in our building. It was very much foreign to me from my suburban public school experience in Minnesota. And I really struggled with the message that it sent about our students and the message that it sent to our students, the majority of whom were Black and nearly all of whom lived in poverty. And there are a few moments I remember from my teaching years where having the officer sprint from one part of the building to another to intervene in an unfolding situation was probably convenient. There are also moments I clearly remember when it felt like an unclear line between the officer and students had been crossed, when it was okay to joke and be having fun, and then all of a sudden when it very much was not. So these are obviously just my experiences, and are about one officer in one school many years ago. But I share this to be open about how having officers in our schools is an issue I have long sort of struggled with and thought about. As some who have had private conversations with me can attest. But it is not one that I have spoken publicly about as a board member. And I own the power and position that I have to do so, and that it probably feels late in coming. So that reality brings the systemic issues we are facing to the forefront. And this conversation isn't about individual officers or the SROs who are currently serving at the high school and middle school. This is about the policing system in our country, and that we cannot pretend that the realities of police violence and institutional racism stop when our students, and especially our Black, Indigenous students of color, enter our doors. This is real for them every day in ways that I cannot fully grasp as a white woman, and it's why I feel so strongly that their experiences need to be at the center of our process in evaluating the SRO program in Richfield schools. So I am looking to Steve and his team to see and hear the details of how we are collecting authentic and meaningful student voice in July. And then I want to hear from our district leaders a recommendation for the path forward. And I can see multiple possible paths, and all of them are complex, and all of them will require significant leadership of us. Intermediate District 287, of which Richfield is a member and I am our board representative, changed their model from one of SROs to an alternative approach 4 years ago. And when I recently asked what advice they had for all of the districts who are considering possibilities for the future, they said to build your program around the needs of students. That adult change management can be really tough, but positive change happens with a clear vision rooted in firm beliefs about what students need and deserve to experience in our buildings and champions at the leadership level. So I want to close by saying out loud a few things that people might be feeling right now. One is pain that it's taken another Black person's death to bring this conversation into the open in our district. One is maybe frustration that the 6 of us as board members who do not spend our days in Richfield schools or represent the racial diversity of our student body are in the position of charging our district's leadership to evaluate this and ultimately decide the future on this issue. So my commitment in response to these feelings, and no doubt many others that are out there, is to be open, to be direct, and to be student-centered in what we do and in the work to come. And I personally really do welcome conversation and comments individually, and also to work with anyone who wishes to participate in public comment at our next meeting on July 13th. And that is all I really wanted to share this evening. So Steve, unless there's anything that you want to respond to in what I shared, I am ready to pass the microphone on to Paula.
I will wait and sort of summarize responses at the end rather than intervening.
That sounds great. So Paula, off to you.
Thank you. So I'm going to be very vulnerable here. I've been on the board 4.5 years, and it had to be, a tragedy had to happen for me to learn that our SROs are actually in buildings, dressed, that they actually look like police officers. I naively thought that they were kind of like at the school where I worked, where the guy with a blue shirt would show up in khaki pants, very low key. Kids never notice, and this is someone who got called only when needed, mostly to deal with non-custodial parents. And so I apologize to the whole community in Richfield because I really didn't know that. I think that the whole time I've been on the board, I've been a teacher, and I haven't been able to be in 2 schools at the same time, and not an excuse, but that's really what's happened. The other thing I want to make very clear, I am not first of all, I didn't grow up in the US. I grew up in a place where the police is more or less friendly, and we have issues about classism, but not really racism, because we all come in all spectrum of skin colors. So being in this country 17 years, obviously I've seen a lot of things how I act differently, and I have, I deal what I have to deal with and have. But I know that that's not the same experience for students of color and living in poverty in where we live, right? The other thing is, whenever I speak about the importance of diversity and in our board, like when I wanted to be elected, it's because I felt that, diverse lenses are needed to analyze things, because I never felt that a school board member here or like now before was a bad person. It was just an idea that if you haven't lived an experience, you will have no way to know like how other people think, right? Like it comes from, you just don't know. So I'm at that place right now where I don't know what raising a child, an African-American child is. I don't know what it feels like to be an African American. I don't consider myself a white person because to me, white's like Caucasian and from like totally here and whatnot. So, but I do really want to know more about from the students. I mean, I think I've heard. I appreciate the feedback we've received, the comments, the emails, because that's really opened my eyes to like the actual situation, like how officers were, working at the middle school and the high school. And it's been great to hear from, caring people and parents and our community residents. But I want to know, and it's mostly so that everybody knows, I want to hear from the students. Like, what do they say? I want to know. I have this idea from the non-African American person that if I were an African American student, I would be afraid of a police officer because of everything that happens, because of the way that I know from students I've had, like how they're raised and this and that. But I'm just speculating. I really don't know. So I want to know what it really feels like to be a student where there's a police officer, on site. The other thing that I want to know is to really think about what do we get from these officers, and then what alternatives exist to reach the same outcome without having to have an SRO in the building, if possible. So let's say a list of 5 things, this is how they're helpful, because I'm not going to say, I know things that have happened in both good and bad ways, right? So there is a purpose, an intended purpose in their existence in our buildings. But if we have to think about 5 things that they're good for, like what are other parallel things that, like, well, we can address this by doing this, and not having them freeze up $75,000 that we, the funds are restricted, but there are things in that list that could be very useful, and that's really where I am. Like, I want to know the all sides of like, not all sides, it's not a side. I want to hear about the experiences and really what the alternatives could be.
And that's been just about 5 minutes, just as the sort of check that I committed to giving everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I that's about it, really. I just wanted to tell everyone, like, my lenses right now, my apology to my ignorance, and my commitment to know more. And I'll pass it to Miss Malek. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. That was very helpful to hear your perspective. So I'm going to start I'm just going to start with, in Richfield, we are about 3 miles from where George Floyd died at the hands of Minneapolis police officers on May 25th. We, as Crystal said, it's just one name in a long list of Black people that have died due to police violence. And as we have this conversation about SROs in our own schools, we need to consider these events and all of the effects on our students. And our role as a school board is governance, and in that we have a lot of things to consider. I don't have all the answers. I've done some research and gathering some information. One of the things I read is the suggestion that SROs in schools result in more youth, especially Black kids, being formally arrested for minor conduct issues, beginning what it was referred to by a number of our public commenters as the school to prison pipeline. I also read where the relationship of the SROs to the students actually decreased that and caused there to be a more of a mild reaction to some of the things that students were doing because they knew the kids. So I've read reports of conflicting experiences. I think a lot of the SRO relationship has to do with who that person is. And we have had a great relationship with Officer Hoyne in our high school. But as Paula said, it can't just be about the relationship of that one person. and or one person that where the relationship isn't good. We kind of have to look at the whole picture. So my first question for admin would be, how many times have we had an SRO take police action against one of our Richfield Public School students? Has that happened? How many times has it happened? I have spent some time reaching out to families and community members, and I think more importantly, I agree with what Paula said, is the admin team to work to get our student voice on this subject. What's it like for them? And I am also interested in hearing how we're gathering that information, what we're actually going to be asking beyond whether they want SROs in the school or not, but why? Like, how does having that person in the school affect them? If they don't think they should be there, what ideas do they have for how we could meet some of the needs that we perceive the SROs as meeting right now? And I think it's important that we get that information from middle school students as well as the high school students. And looking at our stated purposes for SROs in Steve's presentation, I think we need to look at what needs those are meeting, or they're meeting for our students, and then really talk about, is that the best way to meet those needs? And what other needs might we not be meeting? I've been a big advocate for social emotional learning, and I think we are making some progress in that. And I think this could potentially be an opportunity to really kick that up a notch and improve some of that. And I think those are basically my general questions, and I am interested to hear kind of how we're going to move forward with all of this. And I also really agree with Chris's comment that this is a complex issue. I don't see it as a yes or no or a single answer, and I think it's going to take a little time for us to figure out what might be best for our kids. That is it. I will move on to Mr. Paula.
Thanks, Christine. I would say I agree with Paula's sentiment that, Paula, you are not alone in having blindness to a degree, to the extent of this program. This program is something that I think predates all of us on the board, and it's just sort of been, and we've carried it and renewed it with a sense of blindness to it, under the premise that we've been told it works. I would say we haven't necessarily critically asked, what does works mean, right? And so, while it is extremely sad that we have a tragedy that gave rise to a number of voices stepping forward at once asking us to review it, I'm pleased at least that we are reviewing it in a critical way, perhaps for the first time, because it is important and it's long overdue. Other boards, of course, have moved more quickly, and that is what we've been asked. I mean, every single public comment we had today, which represents all of the public comments we've had for quite some time, have asked us pointedly, remove it and end the program. And while I understand that, and those other boards seem to have moved quickly, I don't know where they were in their review of the program. So I would want the public to know that it's embarrassing to say we have not been overseeing it very carefully, but at the same time, they may have been and may have had a mountain of things. Now, of course, we have had things. There have been things that have popped up over the last 2 or 3 years. While within the presentation there was finances and contract, but I think of the contract, and I've read the contract, and we've seen some of the things that I only know of the disappointments from this program. I don't necessarily know what the successes are. And every time there's been a disappointment, it is extremely disappointing, right? And so it is an officer, as one of the commenters suggested, intervening and speaking about school discipline, intervening and joking with the student about appearance, which happened to be a birthmark. It's just so dissatisfying that we have the contract, they have the training, yet this still happens. And so this is not an area where we have room for error when you view that this is, in fact, a subcontractor who is not part of our staff, who is not part of our system, that we allow for benefit, but it should not come with burden on top of that. So while we review it, the critical thing is the student voice from the Safe and Supportive Schools Advisory Committee. And I don't think we can do anything without getting at least those students to chime in, as well as many others. And I know it's summer, and I know it's COVID year, and there will be challenges to it. But those voices will be critically important to our review. And while we have heard perhaps from staff or admin and some others, we've heard stories, we've heard anecdotes, but none of that necessarily speaks to data, and none of that necessarily speaks to the opportunity cost of how else could these things have been handled had we had a different structure in place, perhaps like 287 or perhaps like some other model. And so while you can say this worked, but is it really working? In that instance, something happened that was handled, and could it have been handled a different way? And so some of it boils down, and this is a gross simplification, but the program seems very dependent on individuals. The individual SROs, we have a very good one at the high school, and that's unanimous by nearly everyone it's unanimous, so everyone said it. And that person's been there 3 years. We may not have that person forever, and we likely won't. One of the commenters suggested in her 4 years at the middle school, we've had 4 different people. And so if we have if we have 2 people and we have them 12 to 18 months, that is a churn. The Richfield Police has about 50 officers. How many of them have the deep skills of empathy? How many of them have the deep skills of de-escalation? With our training, like, are those the attributes that the police force really attracts, recruits, and trains? And are those the strengths of that skill set? When that might be what we want and might be better serving our student population and overall campus safety. So that's really it. So where I am is like, I just don't even know how we measure. So I would ask the admin team, how do we measure success of this program? It's been carried on forever. So what does it mean to be successful? We should talk openly about that. And when we've had stories or incidents where we deemed them a success with the support of the SRO, is it possible to consider an alternate view, like, could that have been accomplished without a uniformed officer on campus? Could it have been accomplished with a campus security advisor or someone who is actually a district employee, where we seem to attract people who are with empathy, and we can train them in what we want, and they're in a very different vibe of how they interact with students. And we also would have
5 minutes, Tim, just so you know.
We do have to consider how to provide a safe campus as an alternative if we were to go away from this, and that burden's on us. There could be gains from it, and there could be gaps, and we have to have open and perhaps uncomfortable conversations about that. And missing from this, and this is not something we can accomplish, but what is Richfield Police doing to support us? What are their recruiting techniques? What are their training techniques? What are they doing to change their force so that we have a chronic and ever-long pattern where any random 2 officers we get are the bright smiling faces accretive to all the student success we need from them? So we won't be able to provide that, and the administrative team won't be able to provide that, but that's a burden I think is on them. What do they bring to the table? I've read the contract, and the language within it is ghastly. So however it would be rewritten in the future, it would have to be much more student-centered for my liking. Thank you. I yield my time. I'll move on to Allegra.
I want to thank everyone who took the time to write the school board and those that made public comments. I also want to thank Superintendent Unowski for gathering input from various district stakeholders. And thanks to our board chair, Crystal Brackey, for creating the space for each of us to share personal reflections on this matter of school resource officers in Richfield Public Schools. By all accounts, our current school resource officers are very good at their job and have been an example of the long-standing positive working relationship that Richfield Schools has had with our city government. For me, this is not a question of good cop or bad cop, but a question of whether or not students should be policed. I want to be clear in saying that I believe they should not be. I spent over a decade as a junior high teacher and administrator in a school without a stationed SRO. We frequently worked with the police department when, for example, threats of harm were made or drugs were confiscated from students, and we invited officers into the classroom for presentations and other programming collaborations. Students were not ticketed or arrested at school. My experience is that schools should have a positive relationship with their city's police departments for the purposes of security and community building, but I do not think a contracted full-time station position is necessary to achieving those goals. I've heard the current work of our SROs described as part counselor and part social worker, and that they are rarely called upon to be a cop. I can't help but wonder then if our funding might be more effectively used to hire an additional licensed counselor or social worker to support students. However, my personal beliefs on this issue were challenged when I read a recent Star Tribune article about the Minneapolis School Board's decision to end its relationship with MPD. This decision came after years of student activists calling for the removal of SROs, and after the tragic murder of George Floyd. And it was a decision that I agree with. The article included a quote from North High principal and former principal of Lucy Laney, Mari Friesleben, who became nationally renowned after appearing in the documentary Love Them First. Friesleben expressed her disappointment with the district's decision and wrote, "It is at times like these that I wish I weren't at the will of 9 elected officials who will make a decision for all that will deeply impact our one." The intention of the Minneapolis School Board was to protect the lives and dignity of their students, especially Black students. And yet many at North High, with the largest number of Black students in the district, are questioning this decision based on the positive impact of their SRO on their school community. To me, police in schools are often a very visible, tangible sign of the preschool to prison pipeline. They're a sign of white supremacy and often contradict the efforts of programs like Innocent Classroom, Restorative Justice, and PBIS. But there are other signs of white supremacy in public schools that are less visible. In my own reflections as a white school leader, 2 of the characteristics of white supremacy that surface on this issue are paternalism and either-or thinking. The characteristics of white supremacy culture are defined by Kenneth Jones and Tima Okun in Dismantling Racism, or Workbook for Social Change Groups. Paternalism is described as those with power think they are capable of making decisions for and in the interests of those without power. Either-or thinking creates conflict and increases a sense of urgency, as people are felt they have to make decisions to do either this or that, with no time or encouragement to consider alternatives, particularly those which may require more time or resources. So in this case, we either have SROs or we don't. With these factors in mind, I encourage school and district leaders to take steps toward equity-based design, which centers the voices of the most marginalized in a given system. The profile of a student most likely to be arrested at or suspended from school is a Black boy, especially one receiving special education services. Therefore, if we create a new model for school safety that is created with Black boys and their families for Black boys, I believe all students would benefit from that model. So far, in the weeks since the tragic events that have shaken our communities, I have heard primarily from other white community members and RPS parents that share my concerns about police in schools. They, like me, would likely assume that a new school safety model created Black boys would not include SROs. However, I've learned that assumptions can at best be paternalistic and at worst do harm to children and families of color. If pushed to make an either-or decision, I would vote in favor of discontinuing this contract. However, I hope that we don't do that just yet. I hope that we take this moment to pause and build something with our kids that is truly best for our kids. And I will pass to Mr. Tensing.
So thank you very much, Allegra. And you know, I really have learned to appreciate being last in the alphabet. And right now is a time that it's really coming through. How grateful I am to be able to say, I agree. I agree with very much all that has been expressed. I agree with the statements from many of my fellow board members that myself, as a white male, that I am very cognizant that I'm coming at this from a position of privilege, and that I simply do not have the lens and the perspective to understand the experience of so many of our students and families of color. And so I agree that what I really need to hear is from those people, those students, particularly those students who do not look like me, whose experience has been different from mine, and whose experience is critically important to understand as we determine how we want to move forward as a community. I agree wholeheartly with what Allegra has said about the risks of both paternalism and either-or thinking. And I agree wholeheartedly with the direction that a number of my colleagues have laid out, that our task is not necessarily to malign, well, or to, shall we say, really grieve the pain and the suffering that exists and that is so clear. Our task is to envision what can be better and what it can look like that will be better and that will be productive and effective for producing a learning environment where all of our students can succeed. And understanding that all means all, and that we have a special responsibility to lift up those voices that have been traditionally marginalized and not heard. So I am not at this point coming at this with, I am trying very hard, I guess, to not have any preconceived notions and to open myself to learning what I don't know. And I am quite interested primarily, if I had one ask of the administration, that ask would be to really effectively gather that input from our students that can help us to get some clarity on what is the vision for a safe and supportive learning environment where the social and emotional needs are at the forefront. What is the vision for a relationship with law enforcement that works for everybody? And that's what I've got to say. So I will pass it along to Crystal.
Thank you. And I just want to appreciate all of the board members for the obvious sort of, time and care that you put into what you shared tonight, and the fact that we are all learning and thinking deeply about our responsibility to our young people, our responsibility to our community at large, and of course to our team who are in our schools every day and care so deeply for our kids. So thank you to everyone. I am going to have Superintendent Yanowski just respond with thoughts, and of course other staff members that choose to do so as well. And then after that, I'll do sort of one final call for any additional things that have come up for board members.
Sounds good. So I have a set of notes to respond to. And in terms of admin, I know our admin has had some initial thoughts, but we are also waiting for hearing from our students, because as our leadership is driven, we are driven by the voice of our students. And so it will be until August 3rd till we hear more of the voice of what are those inputs, because people will want to reflect on what our students have to say. In terms of gathering information, we are working on a survey, relatively short, sending it out to students with a few questions, but then also opportunity for free comment. We're going to do that via email outreach, but we're also working with outreach workers and going to be gathering voice over several weeks, starting with summer school, to really ask, do SROs make students feel more safe or less safe? And how do they feel about having SROs in our buildings? Of course, in that process, we'll be very clear about gathering the demographics of our students and the demographics of those responses, because we want to be clear that we are getting a representative sample of students, and also look for patterns that might break down along racial lines. I want to respond to clothing of our police officers. Actually, we have a wide range of clothing that is worn. Actually, our officer in the high school typically does wear a full police uniform. The khakis and polo shirt actually is worn in the middle school. And so there are there are different uniforms that are worn by the police officers, and some of them have to do that, have go along with that. There were comments around the school to prison pipeline and tickets being written, and we will gather some of that data. I can tell you that it is extremely rare. As I look into my conscience, one of the things that has allowed us to, I think Mr. Paulus said it, be quiet on this and not as openly reflective is this is not something where students are frequently ticketed by police, where we are entering students with police data. It's also not something where we have heard voice in the past. And so we have not been like some of our neighboring districts that have had thousands of signatures across double digits years asking to remove police from the schools. Looking at comments previously, this has not been something that's been an open dialogue in our city at the moment. The question is, that was also asked, is what can we do without police, and what could we do if it wasn't by a police officer, and how do we then measure their success? And those are hard. I've done a lot of reflection on how do you measure that success, and how do you measure success by the incident that didn't happen or the incident that was stopped. It is not a scientific measure or anything that we can do by data. So that's something I'm going to have to reflect on as I figure out how to bring that back also. And what I appreciate most about the six of you is a unified voice, and I think everybody listening needs to acknowledge the same thing right now, is this is a conversation only amongst adults right now. And we all have different perspectives, and they are our own, and they are not the perspectives of our students. And to me, in this dialogue, the biggest conversation that is missing at the table is our underserved, our sometimes voiceless students that we have to do our best over this next month to hear. And as we have done for multiple years, and part of reimagining Richfield as an equity-based district where we are serving all of the students in our district most effectively, is we are amplifying the voices of those that are often unheard. And I think that it is important in this process that I, as admin and our team who is listening, go out, gather that voice so that we can report that back. And I do know, and I can definitively speak for my leadership team and our admin in Richfield, that voice is going to guide a lot of how we want to figure out the best path forward. And the best path forward will honor our students. It will be safe in our schools with or without police. And we will make sure that we are doing the best by, for, and with our students, and for all of them. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Crystal.
Thank you. So just as promised, I'm going to leave it open for a moment if there are additional comments or questions that board members would like to share.
I know that Director Malik has asked about data on like the tickets or any arrests that have been made. And I'd just like to specify along that as many demographics as can be included, including race, gender, and whether or not students were receiving special education services. I don't know if to what extent this would break data privacy, but if you were able to also include like the nature of those incidences, if they were violent or nonviolent, like as a percentage, I think that would be helpful as well. And then lastly, I don't know if this qualifies as a question for consideration or comment or suggestion, but I would love to see, in addition to a survey, potentially a socially distanced or virtual like affinity focus group. I think the survey data will be really helpful, and I think we could potentially get richer data in an environment like that.
Yeah. Thanks, Allegra. That's similar to, I think, what I was trying to share in my comment too, and the how that we do this in the next month matters a lot in terms of collecting student perspectives in ways that are actually accessible for our students, and that give them the space and the freedom to share what they really think from a place of non-judgment and openness and care. And so those are going to be the details that I definitely am going to be looking for and wanting to hear more about as those plans for student outreach and conversation are being finalized by the team. I don't see any other comments. Okay, so Steve, I will turn it back to you to introduce the third item in the superintendent update this evening.
All right, and so I have my charge and I will be back on August 3rd with that information and a recommendation. Now for the facilities and transportation departments, talking about long-term facilities maintenance and our health and safety reports.
Thank you for having me. My name is Daniel Holcomb. I'm with IEA. IEA is a health and safety consulting company that's been assisting Richfield Public Schools for the past 20 years or so with their health and safety needs. Today, we'll be giving an update on health and safety. This includes the tasks that we accomplished this past year, the annual mock OSHA inspection results, and then fiscal year 21 projects that we have scheduled. Tasks that we accomplished this past year include lead and water sampling, radon testing, sports field testing, playground inspections, and annual trainings for various departments. And this is conducted through Safe Schools, which is an online training portal that provides health and safety training to staff members. So radon is conducted every 5 years, radon testing that is. And this is conducted during the winter months. So the testings include rooms that are below or at ground level. This is because radon comes from the ground, comes through the foundation that has, there's cracks in the foundation, and it settles in classrooms near or at ground level. So those are the rooms that we tested. We tested 535 rooms throughout the district. And we did have retesting that occurred in March for the kits that were missed during pickup, because staff and students tend to grab and throw those away if they don't know what they are. So the management plan is located on the district website under the health and safety page. This includes the testing results, testing schedule, and the map of the testing locations. And this testing has been conducted since 2009-2010 school year. We had no high results. The action level is 4 picocuries per liter. And this is an action level set by MDH. And as you can see, there's a lot of rooms that are tested throughout the district. So that means our HVAC system is doing well. Our foundation is still intact and well. So that's good. That's good to know for the district. Lead and water plan. We test this every 5 years as well. Our 5th year testing year was last year. So we did a full district testing last year. This year we tested 210 fixtures that have been replaced or installed during construction at the high school kitchen and cafeteria, STEM 2nd and 3rd floors, all of RDLS and Hope Church. Same as the radon plan, it's located on the district website. And Richfield has been testing for lead and water since 2001. So the district's designated action level is 15 parts per billion. That is the same action level as most city water systems, 15 parts per billion. So the high school did have 2 fixtures that were above 15. That includes 2 kitchen hand sinks. So these aren't utilized as food prep or water consumption areas. But Dan Kretzinger did label those with a do not drink sticker. Then same thing with STEM. Out of the 90, we had 2 high fixtures, and those were in classroom sinks. Those also were labeled with a sticker. And the teachers and staff just need to be advising students to be drinking out of drinking fountains, water coolers, bottle fillers, water fountains. All those are tested below 15. RDLS, no fixtures were above at RDLS. And then Hope Church did have 2 fixtures that were high. One was a bathroom sink, and one was a classroom sink that did have a drinking fountain next to it. So annually or every other year recently, we've been doing GMAX testing, which is testing your turf football field. And this is to improve player safety and to identify areas that need to have more maintenance done on it. So we did this in May of this year, and the GMAX range was from 80 to 173. The ASTM action level is 200 for GMAX, and that just means that that you need to service your field to reduce the hardness of it to ensure the health and safety of your athletes. So the higher the GMAX, the harder the surface is. And whenever there is any areas that are approaching, Dan Kretzinger does have a company come out to do some maintenance on the machine or on the turf field. So the custodial maintenance staff were trained on playground safety by a certified playground safety inspector last year. The head custodians conduct monthly playground inspections, and those results get shared with the maintenance staff together so they can work on the items that need to be fixed ASAP. Port in place rubber surfacing will be repaired at various playgrounds this summer or fall. And then we'll have that inspected by a certified playground safety inspector once the repairs have been made. So every year we have a mock OSHA inspection conducted by Metro Exu, which is a health and safety company that assists public companies, businesses. So a lot of schools utilize this program. So we identified that we were missing monthly and annual inspections of playground or of fire extinguishers. And so we had our fire extinguishers mapped throughout the district. So we have all those identified now on a map, so they won't be missed during the next annual inspection by our fire extinguisher company. You'll notice that some of the issues are due to construction. So all the construction at the schools. So the cylinders were not stored properly. The contractor did not have these secured to the wall. They were just tied together. We also did have some construction storage in front of a egress exit that was blocking the exit in case of emergency. And all these were taken at the high school. We did the high school inspection this year. We were missing a guard on a pump, which we're having that fabricated. There was accumulated combustible dust in our wood shop. We have to do a better job of cleaning. I know this end of school year was very different than usual. So maybe it was kind of not everything was scheduled, but we need to do a better job of cleaning. End of year. Then also machine guard assessment needs to be conducted for machines that are missing some guarding. Dispose of unlabeled old or excess chemicals. There's no need to store these. They become a fire hazard or another issue to our health and safety if they are stored for long periods of time and corrode the outer housing of the bottles, which these have all been disposed of now through a hazardous waste pickup company. So that these a lot of these have been taken care of, but not all. But they are all planned to be taken care of before the school year starts up this next year. Fiscal year 21, we are doing rooftop fall protection ladder inspections for buildings that have been completed. So we did have RDLS was completed, and as well as STEM due to the rooftop what has been completed at STEM. And that will be continuing throughout each school. We will be doing LACO TAGO program improvements. We are revamping our training, revamping our equipment that we have at each site, and increasing our knowledge throughout the district just to ensure that people are aware of when to use it and when it's required. And to get the training, if someone new is on board, they need to be trained as well. We need to be aware of that. Also, Safe Schools online training. This kind of has been rolled out for the past year now. But this is the full year of implementation this summer for custodial and maintenance staff. So we're getting all that on board. And then health and safety activities for the referendum changes. This includes just looking at some of the building drawings, ensuring that we have eye wash stations and fire extinguishers, and we're not blocking areas of access. So stuff like that, that'll be ever changing with everything that's going on, but just doing routine walkthroughs of buildings just to ensure that if OSHA did show up, we're not going to have an issue with stuff that's on site. So I want to thank you for allowing me to present. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Dan Kretzinger, and we'll be happy to answer anything. Thank you.
Thank you. Craig, I'm not sure if there's anything that you would like to add before we move on to board members.
Nothing specific to add other than this is obviously reporting on all of the practices that we've been doing. Some of these things now have become requirements for school districts to be doing it, but the radon testing and the lead and water testing are two examples of those. And we have been doing those for beyond the time that, or we had been doing those prior to when they were becoming regulations. So much aligned into those work. The LTFM budget is one of the ways that we invest in our health and safety work. And that's coming up later on in the agenda for approval. And there's a health and safety portion of it. And then there's some of the larger projects that were included in that as well. So with the new website, things are all being posted there. They're actually on the facilities page versus the health and safety page now, which just rolled out today with some new, hopefully better ways to kind of align where people might be looking for some of the information as well. Other than that, if there are questions, I can respond to those by board members or follow up as appropriate.
Great, thank you. And we will start with Paula.
I don't have any questions. Thank you as always for a very thorough report. And I'll pass it to Ms. Malik.
Same, thank you, Craig. No questions. Mr. Paulus.
No real questions, just I appreciate the detail provided. I also appreciate seeing that the Hope Church and the RCEPS site is also included in the testing. I'll pass to Ms. Smishak.
I agree, and I will pass to Mr. Sensing.
I have no questions. Just want to again thank Craig and the team for getting a really good, thorough analysis done, and I'm glad that we do this in a regular cycle, so we're staying on top of it. Thank you.
Always nice when reports like this are full of generally positive information and don't come with a ton of questions or concerns. So kudos to the entire team on that. Just to make sure that I'm being consistent, I will leave a pause if there's any questions or comments that have come up in the last 60 seconds for anybody. Okay, that was the last item in the superintendent update. Steve, I just want to ensure that there isn't anything else that you would like to add before we move on in the agenda. Okay, you're off mute, but I see you shaking your head no, so I'm gonna move forward.
You hear me? There we go. I just off mute. I am struggling with computer, so yes, I am good.
Thanks.
Thank Craig and the team.
So the next item is approval of the consent agenda, which contains routine business items. And I'm just gonna use my privilege as chair to put in a special word of appreciation and recognition to Dr. LaTanya Daniels, whose position as our new assistant superintendent is on tonight's consent agenda. I am so excited to work with you in this new capacity. This is another routine business item, so I'm not going to individually call on board members, but rather we'll just pause to see if there are any questions about the consent agenda. Okay, seeing and hearing none, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
I will move the consent agenda.
I think Christina's the one who kept talking the longest, so I'm going to give her the motion. Is there a second?
I will second.
Okay, so we have a motion by Ms. Malik and a second by Ms. Smishak. Any discussion? Christine, you're on mute.
Sorry. Seeing none, I will pull the board. Ms. Cole.
Aye.
Mr. Paulus.
Aye.
Ms. Smishak.
Aye.
Mr. Tensing.
Aye.
The clerk votes aye, and Ms. Brockie.
Aye. The consent agenda is approved. We move into the old business section of the agenda, and old business this evening is returning to the 3 existing board policies that we've been in the process of revising and discussing over quite a few months now. First up is Board Policy 612 and the accompanying guidelines on curriculum development.
All right, so I think we are reaching the end of our journey with some of these policies. And so in terms of curriculum development and the approval and selection process, I believe all of the changes in there. I personally reviewed and double checked all of this myself. And so curriculum development is really about how do we go about an overall curriculum review process and curriculum development cycle, and what does that look like overall? And so how do we go about selecting curriculum for our district, and then the accompanying guidelines. We have read these over multiple months. They've been reviewed and cleaned up on multiple occasions, and so I will just turn it to the board if there are any questions or a motion.
Great. Thank you. So we will go through the list alphabetically, starting with Paula.
I don't have any questions. Ms. Malik.
No questions either. Mr. Paulus?
I have no questions. Ms. Smishek.
No questions here. Mr. Tensing.
I'm good too. Back to the chair.
All right. This is the benefit of having talked about this one and several of these others across, I don't even know how many meetings at this point. So do we have a motion to approve the revisions to Board Policy 612?
I will move that we approve the revisions to Board Policy 612.
I'll second.
So we have a motion by Mr. Tensing and a second by Ms. Cole. Any final discussion?
Seeing and hearing none, I will pull the board. Ms. Cole?
Aye.
Mr. Paulus?
Aye.
Ms. Smishek?
Aye.
Mr. Tensing?
Aye.
The clerk votes aye, and Ms. Brockie.
Aye. The policy is approved. Congratulations all. The next policy before us, I think, is the one we've actually been working on the longest, and that is Board Policy 112 and its accompanying guidelines, our wellness policy.
Yeah, so I think we're 7 months into this one because I think we as a district have taken this extremely seriously. Obviously, it is a long time in the rearview mirror, and with this policy training and implementation, hopefully never revisited. The most recent additions are clarifying some additional language suggestions to really be extremely clear and make sure that we are clear specifically in 112, talking about unpaid meal debt and 100% sure that we are treating every student and every moment with dignity, that every single student will always receive full choice USDA lunch and full choice USDA meals, regardless of any financial situation. Policy overall talks about PE and PE opportunities, wellness, health, and nutrition, and those accompanying guidelines. And I am very appreciative with the large range of feedback gathered by Dr. Clarkson and her team and the cabinet team from students and community members and the nutrition team to make sure that we are ready and good to go and move into the future. So with that, I will turn it back in hopes of a motion.
Fantastic. Again, starting with Paula. We're going to give you a second or two.
I couldn't find my mic button. I don't have any questions, no. Ms. Malik.
The only question I have is under the guidelines, section C under point of sale clarifications. There's some really nice detail added that I very much appreciate on the process and the at point of sale information. And I guess the only thing I'm looking for is the fact that we are going to do some specific training on this part where we talk about concern for the dignity of the student. Under no circumstances can communication occur that shames the student or could attract attention. It's very specific about using a voice that can only be heard by the individual student I really appreciate all of that, but I just, from our own experience, I think it's really important to clarify some type of training that will occur to go along with that.
And so in response to that, just as a reminder, this year we did a full policy review training by all staff, coordinated by HR. And so our new practice as a district, which is to make sure that we are in alignment of our policies and policy changes, is to always train all staff on the new policies and the new implementation. And so that is what we're doing as a practice throughout our district. And our HR team is leading as a workshop week and beginning of school activity for all of our staff. Are you wanting that specific language in the policy? Because then we would have to think about adding it to every policy, or just want to make sure that that's happening?
I want to be, I'm just trying to figure out a way to be reassured that it's happening. I don't know that it needs to be in the policy, but we have all experienced how different an interpretation of that can be. That's my concern.
Got it. All right. So since Dr. Daniels and Dr. Clarkson are listening, and they lead a lot of our training, and I believe Craig is still there. So HR, just as a reminder, during workshop week is training. And so amongst the documentation, when we report on the start of school, we're going to also look at reporting the training that we did during workshop week, and specific to especially guideline 112.2 and nutrition and wellness policy. And so we will report back to the board as we report back opening of school, the training that did occur, and we'll give you some of those details.
That would be great.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Paulus?
I have no questions. Ms. Smishek.
I have no questions, and just want to say how impressed I've been through the process of this policy in particular, just how much input our leadership has received from community members, and just the diligence that I've seen from all stakeholders. So thank you for your work. Mr. Tensing.
Yeah, I have no questions at all. I will pass it back to the chair. Thanks.
Thank you. Two things for me. One, I specifically want to appreciate Michael Manning, who joined the team this spring, and I know has been critical in getting these revisions to the end, and really, I think, looking at them with a critical lens and thinking about the work that he and his team are charged with doing. So I just wanted to appreciate him, and am excited for him to join a board meeting sometime in the coming month to be able to share more with us about what they are doing. And then the second thing actually was a question prompted by Christine's comment about training, because I hear the thorough work that it sounds like is going to be happening before school starts up in the fall, whatever school entails, but also wanting to make sure that there are systems in place for staff who maybe join us mid-year, because we know there is some transitions and turnovers that take place, and specifically thinking about this wellness policy and the guidelines around nutrition, just wanting to ensure that there are clear systems in place for staff members whenever they join us to really have that in-depth specific conversation about the way in which we are approaching this and expect conversations to be had as a district.
So absolutely. So Mr. Holge does lead this work, and he leads it with Mr. Manning, and I can see him shaking his head yes. HR actually provides orientation to our new employees. And so as he continues to evolve that work, and as we have added a full policy training, one of the things we do as we orient new staff is do that training and review policies. And we will make sure that they are getting not just the words of this particular policy, but also the intention, because obviously we have learned awkwardly that words and intentions can sometimes separate in the most uncomfortable ways, and we want to make 100% sure that we are not having that happen.
Yes, thank you. Any other final comments or questions from board members? Okay. Is there?
I only pointed out the one thing of concern. I just wanted to add how much I really do appreciate also how much effort went into this, and I think it was worth 7 months worth of work to get what we got, and all of the input from all of the other people. So thank you.
That sounds great. That also sounds like potentially a good transition to make a motion, Christine, if you feel so moved.
I will move approval of policy 112 along with the guidelines as presented.
I will second.
Great. So we have a motion by Ms. Malik and a second by Mr. Paulus. Any final discussion?
Seeing none, I will pull the board. Ms. Cole?
Aye.
Mr. Paulus?
Aye.
Ms. Mitchell?
Aye.
Mr. Benson?
Aye.
The clerk votes aye, and Ms. Brockey.
Aye. The policy is approved. And again, congratulations all. The final policy before us this evening is 610, and its accompanying guidelines on the selection and evaluation of instructional resources.
Absolutely. And so accompanying 612, this is more of the specific nitty gritty of how do we choose particular resources? How do we evaluate them? What do you do if there is a specific concern for that? And what might be the method by which you give input if you are not excited or happy about some of the materials that are used by Richfield Public Schools? And so it outlines those processes. We've walked through this one a couple of times also, and I'm bringing it back to you again today for hopeful passage after, again, a fine-tooth comb of revisions and editing.
Thank you. Paula.
I don't have anything to add to that, Ms. Malik.
No questions either. Mr. Paulus?
I have no questions. Ms. Smishak?
No questions. Mr. Timpson?
I am good too, Ms. Brockey.
Thank you. So with no questions or comments whatsoever, is there a motion to approve the revisions to board policy 610?
So moved.
I'll second.
So we have a motion by Mr. Paulus and a second by Ms. Malik. Any final discussion? Christine, we can't hear you.
I will pull the board. Ms. Cole?
Aye.
Mr. Paulus?
Aye.
Ms. Mishak?
Aye.
Mr. Tenson?
Aye.
The clerk votes aye, and Ms. Brockey.
Aye. Policy is approved. Very productive evening on the policy front. So we turn now to the new business items before us for the first time this evening. Our first item of business is approving the board meeting calendar for the 2020-2021 school year.
Yes, and so I will introduce this, but I'll satirically look back and say you are rewarded by your aggressive policy work by receiving at your next meeting a new set of policies to begin that work with. So, woohoo! All right, school board calendar. So at the end of June each year, we look at the school board calendar for the next year, maintaining that first and third Monday schedule. You will note on the second page, we basically have the dates outlined. Some of them are on Tuesdays, and those are the days where there are national holidays on the Monday. You'll notice that public comment is on our second meeting of the month. And then we have added, with both public comment opportunities, 2 meetings in June, similar to this year, to acknowledge that we have needed that, and maintaining 1 in July. So as you'll notice, we've actually gone to 11 months of 2 meetings a month and 1 month with just 1. And then you'll see those exceptions, and those exceptions at the bottom, which talk about why and where we would have things needed. As I'm noticing an error on my part, it says only 1 meeting. It does say only 1 meeting in June on the 14th, and then that additional meeting on the 28th, only if needed. And so we're tentatively putting that out there instead of deciding on that in March, since we have added that over the last couple of years. With that, I'll turn it back to you for any questions or input.
Thank you. Starting with Paula.
None at this time.
No questions, Mr. Paulus?
I have no questions. Ms. Mishak?
No questions. Mr. Tempting.
No questions, Ms. Brackey.
All right. I would just say thank you for proactively adding that second meeting in June as needed, because I feel like we've talked about that multiple times, and obviously we exercised that as evidenced by us being here this evening. So I think it's good for planning purposes that we have it tentatively on the agenda moving forward. There are no final comments or questions, and I certainly do not see anybody getting ready to bring one up. We could entertain a motion to approve the calendar.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Paulus, was that you who made the motion?
Yes, it was.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm taking notes on a different screen than the camera. So we have a motion by Mr. Paulus and a second by Ms. Cole. Any final discussion?
Seeing and hearing none, I will poll the board. Ms. Cole.
Aye.
Mr. Paulus.
Aye.
Ms. Mishek.
Aye.
Mr. Thompson.
Aye.
The clerk votes aye, and Ms. Brackey.
Aye. The school board meeting calendar is approved. Next up is a request to approve the bid award for the district's milk contract for the coming school year. Mr. Holge, is it fair to assume that you are going to be introducing this one? Okay.
Yep,
great.
I'll jump in right now. So, yeah, the request is for the board to approve the milk bid award to Plainview Dairy. We did conduct a full competitive bid this year, and Plainview came out with the best available price on that. Average expenditures or annual expenditures are projected to be $88,000 as part of that. It does have escalators and de-escalators that are involved in it. So if milk prices increase or decrease significantly, that would be in place that way. One of the questions that came up via the board this past weekend was, how does this compare to our current? The pricing is very to our current pricing in this area and is competitive in that way. We have worked with Plainview for most of this year, and they've been a quality partner in this work as well.
Great, thank you. We'll start comments and questions before entertaining a motion to approve with Paula.
No questions, Ms. Malik.
Thank you for all of the detail and the many pages of that document, but no questions. Mr. Paulus.
I have no questions. Ms. Mishek.
I have no questions as well. Mr. Tempting.
I have no questions, Ms. Brackey.
Ditto for me. So given that, we could entertain a motion to approve the bid award as presented.
I will move that we approve the bid award as presented. I got it.
I'll second.
Yes, so we have a motion by Mr. Tensing and a second by Ms. Malik. Any final discussion?
Seeing and hearing none, I will poll the board. Ms. Cole.
Aye.
Mr. Paulus.
Aye.
Ms. Mishek.
Aye.
Mr. Tenzing.
Aye.
The clerk votes aye, and Ms. Brackey.
Aye. The bid award is approved. Next is a similar but different request, this time to approve the bid award for the district's bread and bakery contract.
Yeah, thank you. And the request is to award that contract to Panagold this year as part of a competitive bid. You can see in the notes that we only had one of 4 vendors respond, which was a little bit unusual, but the pricing is with our current vendor, and the pricing is consistent with what our current vendor is currently providing. So it is still considered a competitive bid, even though we did not have multiple people responding to it, but we found that it was in line with what our current services are. Both of these bids actually are a 1-year contract, so we have the chance to review that, but we can renew that contract any year without a formal bid process as well. So with this, we're asking for that award to Panagold with an annual estimated expenditure of $15,135.
Thank you, Craig. Again, board member questions and comments, starting with Paula.
None at this time, Ms. Malik.
No questions, Mr. Paulus.
I have no questions. Ms. Mishek.
No questions. Mr. Tempting.
I'm good. Ms. Brackey.
I'm also good. So with no questions or comments, we could entertain a motion to approve the bid award.
So moved.
Second.
That first one again was tough for me. Was that Paula or Allegra?
Allegra.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Every once in a while, I can't quite make out the differences in voices. So, a motion by Ms. Mishak, and was the second Mr. Paulus?
That was me.
Oh, gosh, that was just a failure all the way around. So we have a motion by Ms. Mishak and a second by Mr. Tensing. Any final discussion?
Seeing and hearing none, I will pull the board. Ms. Cole.
Aye.
Mr. Paulus.
Aye.
Ms. Misha.
Aye.
Mr. Tenzin.
Aye.
The clerk votes aye, and Ms. Brocky.
Aye. The bid award is approved. Next is a really important request and an annual one to approve the long-term facilities maintenance plan for Richfield Public Schools.
Yep. Thank you very much. And again, this request is to approve the long-term facilities maintenance plan, which does include a 10-year plan. We do tend to focus on the first few years moving out, but look at that strategically over the long term as well. It also authorizes the inclusion of the LTFM levy for the fiscal year 22. So we're already thinking about our 21-22 fiscal year with this, but as we start building in levy projections and things like that for action in December, this does authorize that inclusion. It includes authorization for $6,007,223. That includes both just over $1.8 million in annual general fund levy for LTFM, and then $4.1 million or almost $4.2 million in that debt service for the alternative facilities, as well as the indoor air quality portion of our current facilities project. And those are projects that are over $100,000 approved by the state and approved by the board. So these are things very consistent with what we've had in the past. You can see the list of projects that are currently planned for the 2021 school year, as well as the projects included for the 21-22 planning year. And if there are any questions, I can respond to those questions. Otherwise, we're asking for your authorization in this on these action items.
Thank you, Craig. Paula, start with you. She's shaking her head, so okay, she just came up.
The bar at the bottom where I have to move away from me. So sorry. I know I don't have any questions. Ms. Malik.
No questions.
Craig, can I ask the
Mr. Paulus.
what thank you. What are the alternative facilities?
So the alternative facilities are indoor air quality bonds that were issued in between, I think it was 2004 and 2008. So there are a variety of projects that were issued at that time for some of our HVAC systems. Some of those same systems now are being replaced 15 years later, but they are debt services that were apportioned at that point and authorized by the board.
Okay, so it's incorrect for me to read them as buildings that are not part of our usual listing of main bill. It's not some.
Correct. So alternative long-term facilities maintenance replaced a series of different funding sources: health and safety, alternative facilities, and a variety of projects that are identified in that worksheet that's there. It is an alternative funding source for facilities based on age of buildings and things like that. So it's calculated at that time. The state has sought to clear that up a little bit with the new long-term facilities maintenance that combines those into a variety of areas into one. It used to be some districts that were of certain size received additional funding than what others did. Now it's much more based on the enrollment of a program and things like that, in addition to those larger projects that are authorized by the board and the state for like our indoor air quality project right now.
All right, thank you. I don't have anything else. That was more detail than I needed.
Sorry, it is our regular buildings that we are owning and running.
Perfect, thank you.
Thanks.
Ms. Mishak.
No questions from me. Mr. Tenting.
I'm good, Ms. Brocky.
I'm also good and just appreciative of, I know the amount of long-term vision that has to go into putting something like this together. So thanks to you and your team, Craig. I'll pause for any final comments or questions. Seeing none, we could certainly entertain a motion to approve the long-term facilities maintenance plan.
I move that we approve the long-term facilities maintenance plan as presented.
I'll second.
I'll second.
You just got beat out, and fortunately I actually just kept looking at the camera this time so I didn't confuse the voices again. We have a motion by Ms. Malik and a second by Ms. Cole. Any final discussion?
Seeing and hearing none, I will poll the board. Ms. Cole?
Aye.
Mr. Paul?
Aye.
Ms. Mishak?
Aye.
Mr. Tenson?
Aye.
The clerk votes aye, and Ms. Brockton?
Aye. The budget is approved. And we next move into the advanced planning section of the agenda, beginning with the legislative update. So I will look first to Board Member Peter Tensing to share any updates, followed by Superintendent Yanowski.
I actually do not have anything specific. So I'll go ahead and let the superintendent jump in.
All right, so I did include in the board packet, we get regular legislative updates as part of our membership in AMSD, the Association of Metropolitan School Districts. So you have that there in its entirety. Basically summarizing the special session, summarizing the ed policy bill and some of the components that are new that were passed during the special session. And then also an overall summary of some of the bills that were passed during that time. Generally a small amount of things connected to what is happening within schools, and nothing extremely large in regard to new information for us in the earlier session. But did want to include that so board can see the overall summary.
Thank you. And obviously the information that you shared in the superintendent update is top of mind, and it seems like the biggest priority for everyone really at the state and legislative levels at this point. So we will transition just into open time for any information and or questions members of the board would like to share with each other. So we will just go around the Google Meeting room on that, starting with Paula.
Say that one more time. Google Meeting room.
I was just going off the cuff. You're first. It's if there's any information or questions you want to share with anybody.
I do not. I felt that I was at a PD and they were about to move me out of where I was and put me someplace else. So I
definitely know what you mean though, now that you say that.
No, I don't have anything to share at the moment, Ms. Malik.
I have nothing to share either, Mr. Paulus.
I have nothing to share, Ms. Smishek.
Nothing from me, Mr.
I'm also at a loss for words, so I'll pass it on back.
Okay. I think it was at the last board meeting where at this time I said that the graduation ceremony was about to premiere, and I just strongly encourage everybody watching to take the time to just sit and soak up the celebration of our high school seniors in the class of 2020. Kudos to Dr. Daniels and her team at the high school for making what I thought was a special ceremony possible for our seniors. So it's still up on YouTube for anybody that hasn't watched it yet. And then also this morning I was on our district website looking at some things this afternoon. And then when I went back this afternoon, it was a whole new website. So also just wanted to make sure everybody knew that our new website switch was flipped this afternoon. So obviously content is going to be migrating and being updated, but it's an exciting change and one I know people are ready for. So check it out.
I really like the new board picture. It's great.
Yes, there's no Tim Paulus in there for some reason. Well, it's sad that we miss Naomi in there, but we luckily miss out on Mr. Paulus too.
Right.
We'll have to figure out how to Photoshop him in.
Or not.
Or not, depending on what he prefers.
Yes, we certainly are limited in our ability to take updated group pictures at the moment. That is for sure. Okay, our next meeting and the only meeting for the month of July will be on Monday, July 13th at 7 p.m. And again, at this point, we do expect it will continue to be a virtual meeting, though if that changes, obviously we will be in touch, hopefully well in advance. Finally, just an open last call for any items that board members would like to request for discussion either in July or at another upcoming meeting that we have not already discussed. Okay, I don't see any. Steve, I'm going to give you a moment for any final updates that you would like to share before we start to transition into our closed session.
I don't believe I have anything at this time. I think I've talked and presented more than enough.
Okay, I just always want to make sure that I give you the chance. So our next item of business is to move into closed session for the annual superintendent's evaluation as allowed by Minnesota State Statute 13D.05. Do we have a motion to move into closed session?
I move we move into closed session.
I will second.
I'll second the motion.
You were just judged again, Pete. We have a motion by Ms. Malik and a second by Mr. Paulus. Any final discussion?
Hearing none, I will poll the board. Ms. Cole?
Aye.
Mr. Paulus?
Aye.
Ms. Mishak?
Aye.
Mr. Tenton?
Aye.
The clerk votes aye and Ms. Rocky.
Aye. So the board is going to move into closed session. This regular meeting feed is going to continue to stream while we are in closed session. So the board members are going to leave this meeting, join the closed meeting. We will all return to this regular meeting upon conclusion of our closed session to officially adjourn, just to give anyone watching a sense of what is going to happen from here. So board members, please exit the meeting and I will see you in the closed session.
Long time no see. Well, you're right. It's going to be like 9:52 instead of 10:30. You, as always, I am wrong. You are right.
I don't know about as always, but I had a
good recording,
estimate.
so you have it forever now, right?
We are missing 2, so we'll give them another minute. See, we do hear you typing. We technically have quorum, so maybe I'll give them 1 more minute. There we go. Here's Tim. We were just debating whether or not to adjourn without you.
Which is fine. I was unclear that I thought I requested to join the meeting, but it was actually more in my control than I was aware. So
I wonder if Pete is having the same challenge. Okay, we will give it a moment, and then I assume live streaming is going to begin again momentarily.
We are still live. I'm not sure about live streaming. I know we're still recording. So Scott, are we live? We're still live streaming through the whole conversation. So
hi, everybody. Okay, as you can tell, we weren't doing any official board business because we still have not technically come back to order. But I think so it's appropriate to do that now. So we are back in open session officially at 9:53 p.m. I will make a report and a public summary of the superintendent's annual evaluation at our next board meeting on July 13th. The final item of business this evening on the agenda is to adjourn. And since this item doesn't require a full board vote, I will simply and officially adjourn the meeting as chair at 9:53 p.m. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you for being with us, and we will see you again on July 13th.
Night.